Well, I don't know anything else. So I'm a third generation native Arizonan, and have never had any time changes. For us in Arizona, it's always worked really well. I think when you consider that, the only thing that really changes in the wintertime, it gets dark or stays dark a little bit longer in the morning until about 7. But at night, it's still kind of you can tell that it's wintertime versus summertime. And I think the biggest obstacle we face in Arizona is because there's only 2 states, Arizona being one that doesn't. Most folks around the country, when you're scheduling calls or meetings or sending emails, I find that it's easiest if I schedule in Eastern time, because people have a challenge figuring out what time it is in Arizona. And I will say, there is one downside, and that is, right now, given that it's just switched over, I start getting emails at about 5 a.m. in the morning.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Welcome to the American Potential Podcast. I'm your host, David Fromm, and I just want to check and see how you're feeling today after losing an hour of sleep this weekend. I'm sure some of you are all needing a second or third cup of coffee to make it through the day. Twice a year, we go through this, and it takes some time to adjust to. Fun fact, out of all 50 states, only 2 skip daylight savings time, Hawaii and Arizona, except for the Navajo Nation, which also doesn't observe it. Which does observe it. I have to imagine people in those states aren't dealing with the groggy mornings like the rest of us. At one point, the U.S. Senate actually passed a bill to make daylight savings time permanent, but it stalled in the House. So here we are, still changing our clocks twice a year. Today, we're diving into the debate of if we should keep daylight savings time or get rid of it. But before we get into it, how did we even end up with this system in the first place? Here's a clip from Michael Downing, author of Spring Forward, talking about it.
We got to it really because we were following Europe in World War I. The British had long loved the idea of daylight saving time. Of course, they're not famous for their sunshine, so a little more evening sunlight made sense to them. The Germans adopted daylight saving during World War I. The British followed suit. And in a panic of attempting to save energy, every country in World War I follows suit, and that's how America really gets involved.
After it was passed in 1918, it was only in effect for a year and a half. It wasn't until 1966 that we got a national standard time that we deal with today. So let's get into this with our 2 guests. The first is from the state of Arizona, where he doesn't have to deal with daylight savings time. Stephen Shadegg is Americans for Prosperity's state director in Arizona. And then Tim Parrish, who has to deal with the time change and is the Americans for Prosperity state director for Virginia. Welcome, guys.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, David.
Yeah, really excited to have you on and looking forward to the conversation around this topic.
Yeah, it should be fun. Well, we'll start with you, Tim. So how are you feeling today? I mean, you got a little less sleep.
I'm feeling great, David, and I'll say there's a reason that 48 states and Navajo Nation, as you mentioned, still recognize daylight savings because, this is a majority rules kind of thing here. There's sense to be made out of this.
Yeah. Well, I imagine Stephen's feeling probably a little bit better. However, I also know that maybe he's feeling worse than everybody because he's the father of a newborn. Congratulations.
Yeah,
that is true. I might be a little tired because of that, but not because of any changes in our clocks. So,
all right. Yeah. Think about how bad it would be if you had to change your clock, man.
It'd be tough.
So, all right. Maybe each of you could give me your thoughts on daylight savings time and why we should keep it or get rid of it. Tim, let's start with you.
Yeah. So look, David, I know that in the clip, there was a lot of talk about the history of this in World War I, and really it was all about productivity. If the soldiers were outside more, engaged more during the daylight, they weren't inside using, actually Ben Franklin in Paris said candles, or, in World War II, it had just been energy. But, and I have a military background, so that, yeah, I totally understand that. But more so today, I think in a more contemporary setting, I did a lot of research on this actually in preparation. I also have a law enforcement background, and there's a lot of stats out there that support, a lot of studies that support crime reduction with daylight savings, how much of time that there's still the sun's up and people are sort of still active, talking about visibility, with traffic reduction, a reduction in traffic crashes, but also just crime reduction, because bad guys like to do things at night. What does that song say? The freaks come out at night, right? Like, but when there's daylight and people are still out and active, people are a lot less likely to be engaged in crime. I pulled some quick numbers real quick. Brookings Institute did a study. During daylight savings, we save about $59 million on robberies and thefts. Violent crime like rapes, murders, robberies are all down significantly during daylight savings. I hate to take a negative turn and kind of make it dark, but that's some of the good support for why we like daylight savings. And I'll just, I don't know, look at the crime out in Arizona to see how they're doing with the daylight saving stuff out there.
Well, it's kind of funny that you didn't want to make it dark. We were actually trying to make it lighter, I guess. Daylight savings.
Exactly.
So Tim, you say, I know that you served in the Marine Corps for over a decade. So
yeah.
Is there daylight savings time anywhere else in the world or wherever you served?
Yeah, it's a little different. We use a 24-hour metric in the military, so I still serve in the reserves today. And actually, all my personal clocks, watches, cell phones are all in military time, as we call it. So we do recognize daylight savings based on the installation that you're stationed, but we sort of operationally don't recognize it in as much as we use a 24-hour format, no matter what time or how much the sun is up or down. It's sort of the same time from an operational standpoint globally.
So, Stephen, why do you hold your opinion?
Well, I don't know anything else. So I'm a third generation native Arizonan, and have never had any time changes. For us in Arizona, it's always worked really well. I think when you consider that, the only thing that really changes in the wintertime, it gets dark or stays dark a little bit longer in the morning until about 7. But at night, it's still kind of you can tell that it's wintertime versus summertime. And I think the biggest obstacle we face in Arizona is because there's only 2 states, Arizona being one of them that doesn't. Most folks around the country, when you're scheduling calls or meetings or sending emails, I find that it's easiest if I schedule in Eastern time, because people have a challenge figuring out what time it is in Arizona. And I will say, there is one downside, and that is, right now, given that it's just switched over, I start getting emails at about 5 a.m. in the morning. Usually 6, it gets really moving because everybody's at 9 o'clock is in the office. Which is a little bit different, I think, for most folks than when they're on the East Coast. But outside of that, it's great because in the afternoons when you guys get to go home, I make sure I follow up with those early emails. So it works out well in Arizona. I think that the change helps, not having a change allows everybody to kind of keep their standard operating procedure, and things run smoothly. So
since you're native Arizonan and grew up there, did you, growing up, were you aware of that other people were changing their clocks?
No, not at all. It wasn't until I started, obviously getting involved in the professional side. And then I think if you work in our line of work, which is politics, everything flows through DC. And so that's when you really start to notice the change.
Yeah, very true. Very true. That would be kind of funny. All of a sudden, it's like, what are all these people doing? They artificially move their clock? Are you kidding me? So, you all travel all over the country, a fair amount. I know in our jobs, we do have a fair amount of travel, and you'd probably deal with, time changes, kind of jet lag. So shouldn't clock lag be in our vocabulary? I mean, Tim, what do you think?
No, I mean, look, we all love our jobs and get paid to do some incredible work. I think you should be excited and show up. I mean, David, you know me, I'm just excited about everything. So I don't think so. Sleep on the plane, catch up when you get there, you'll be fine. And plus, speaking of that, I saw another study that was done that said in the 10 minutes on average it takes to change your clock, we lose about $1 billion in industry. But the beautiful thing is now everything's digital. So your phone, as soon as you connect to a new network, it pings off that tower and gets the new time. All the digital watches do the same thing, all your Apple watches and all that. So everything automatically changes. When you show up, sleep on the plane, and when you get there, continue to do great work, clock lag or not.
Yeah, I know, Stephen, you're very, very truthful when you say that everything if you're working in a kind of a public policy or political industry, it all runs through DC, and it seems like we're all always on that Eastern time. And I have found that, if you're coming from Pacific time and you have to all of a sudden be on Eastern time, it is a bit of that 9 a.m. meeting takes on a whole different meaning.
It definitely does. And I think that's part of living on the West Coast and the Pacific. If you're from the West Coast, you realize that, a giant majority of the population is on the East Coast. And so out in the West, I think you kind of always get overlooked from a national perspective. And people tend to overlook the fact that, when you come to DC, that you're 3 hours behind and adjusting to that time change. But now that I hear Tim talk about being able to sleep on the plane, maybe I should be supportive of daylight saving time, because I can never sleep on a plane. So if that's something that comes along with this, maybe we'll adopt it. But I doubt it will be
Stephen,
a personal thing.
What we could do is you and I both could talk to our supervisors and just get permanent business class seating. That way we can sleep on the plane and clock lag is not an issue for us. There we go.
There you go. All right. So if I heard you correctly when we talked earlier about why you have the position that you have, Stephen, it seems like, you're kind of saying like, hey, it works, just not changing. Like that's your experience. And it's just always worked. Whereas Tim, you're saying like, from a crime standpoint or productivity, that if we have a little more daylight, it's just going to be a better thing. Is that essentially what you all are saying?
Yeah, look, another sort of figure that came out is in the golf industry or any industry that's outdoors, you see a $200 to $400 million more in revenue for companies that support things outdoors during daylight savings time, because more people are out and they're active and they're doing things. It sounds like over in Arizona, they just go to bed. Like there's just not anything else happening after a certain hour. But no, that's what I am saying is you're seemingly more productive. People are seemingly more productive. Crime is generally lower. People are a lot more alert, which drives down your traffic accidents and stuff like that. And as we say in the South, David, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. We've been doing daylight savings for a long time in this country, and it seemingly has worked for a large amount of people, except those people out in Arizona and Hawaii.
But wouldn't that added daylight in the evening be counteracted by darker mornings? I mean, wouldn't that make a difference in a negative way?
Stephen?
It is a little bit harder to wake up in the mornings, but if you're an active person, getting up in the morning at 5:30 is just something that you adjust to. And I think that's a change that, like you guys, when you have to shift your clock, you just wake up at 5:30 and you have to get a little more coffee in yourself. But what is nice is that, at the same time, while traditionally it's in the wintertime, it gets dark or gets light later in the morning, the advantage is that today it is, I think, about balming about 80 degrees here in Arizona, and it will stay light until about 6:45, maybe about 7. And so we get to go home and enjoy the evening, and it's March. It's early March right now, and quite frankly, it allows us to do a lot more during the day. And in the summertime, it works out well because early mornings in Arizona are really important, especially for the working industry. Mm-hmm. If Arizona were to change times, it would certainly have a huge impact on our workforce, primarily because in the summertime, when it's about 120, 115, our most productive hours for most of our workers who are out in the sun are in those early hours, like 4:30, and usually they cut out by about 12. So that would definitely cause a challenge. They might have to get up at 2:30, but again, it's worked for Arizona because we've never observed it, and I don't see the state changing anything anytime soon.
Yeah, I've experienced that when I've been out on the West Coast, and all of a sudden there's people doing manual labor and work outside my window at some crazy hour. I'm like, what in the world is going on here? But I will say I've always loved going out to the West Coast just because I feel like such a responsible human, because I go to bed earlier and I wake up earlier, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what productive people probably do on my own time zone. Now I just had to transplant myself, and I'm doing it.
Well, there's a wise saying: early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. So we've got to figure out in Arizona.
Well, I wonder. So I mean, there has been some states that are looking at making either standard time or daylight time permanent. What do you guys think about that? Stephen, why don't you go first?
Yeah. So I actually know that our neighboring state, California, actually ran a proposition, and they ended up saying that they were going to get rid of it. However, they decided in the lovely traditional form of California, decided that they were going to let the federal government make the decision, even though their state government did that. I think that when you look at it, I somewhat see this as a state issue. It's a little bit challenging for me to advocate, having living here in Arizona and not having to adjust to it. My basis for that is purely off of, it'll make life a little bit easier for us in the way that we don't change how we schedule things for everybody else. But I do think that, depending on how states see daylight savings times, maybe this is a localized issue. Maybe it's an issue in which we give the states the opportunity to weigh in and citizens there to weigh in, rather than allowing the federal government to make the decision.
Tim?
I think if look, big supporter of federalism, 100% states' rights guy here. But I think if you are, states making decisions individually for themselves. But I think if you do that, you kind of put the West Coast at a disadvantage. I was looking up to see if I could find it, but there was a comedian, Steve Harvey, who did a whole segment about the disadvantage of East and West Coast. Like if you wake up too late on the West Coast, the New York Stock Exchange, for example, in New York City on Eastern Standard Time has already been open for 4 hours. By the time you would be waking up in LA, on this kind of system. Also, as Stephen, put it, everything in our line of work runs through DC. So if DC's already up and active and doing things and you're 2-3 hours late to the party, there's potentially decisions and things being made for those Western states, or they're just behind the power curve from a time perspective for the Western states. If you sort of allow each state to do, and then who knows the interstate commerce disruptions this would cause between states of, 4 states over here on one time and 3 states over here another time. I can only imagine what the disruption in interstate commerce would cause. So I don't think it should be a state thing. I think we should find some sort of uniformity across the country on this. And as I said, it's worked. With the exception of the people who just want to be disruptive out in Arizona. And I'm kidding. But it's worked seemingly for the majority of the country. I think you should have some uniformity on it.
I think the folks in California who maybe woke up too late for the stock exchange, though, my experience there has been that then all of a sudden at like 4 o'clock, you're like, oh, hey, I'm going to go surfing because it's beautiful out still. I can go surfing. Yeah. I'm going to go hike in some mountains. Maybe it is a better way to do things.
Well, I appreciate Tim's concern for our productivity, but I do have to highlight that, in Arizona, we do have the lowest flat tax in the country. We did pass the most expansive ESA reform. We were the first state to pass universal licensing and universal regulatory sandboxes. So it sounds like we're pretty productive here. And maybe Tim would be more productive if he took the side of Arizona and saw the light at the end of the tunnel.
We in Virginia, we're forever productive in as much as we gave the country 6 states. There is no or 6 presidents. There is no constitution, Bill of Rights, nothing without us. So, we freedom, liberty, all those things we've been pretty productive out here in the Commonwealth.
I would like to say, I heard Stephen mention that California was looking to the federal government to set their standard. Maybe Virginia, similar to what they did in some of their pollution standards or vehicle standards, they could look to California again.
No, we have a hard rule. Don't California my Virginia. So no, we're not gonna be doing that anytime soon.
All right. Well, I appreciate your leadership on that. Yeah, I want to say Arizona, for folks who are listening who want to look at like a pretty good recent policy track record, man. And I know Stephen has been integral in some of this, leading our state chapter there. Former governor was just a stud on a lot of things, and they really passed some real transformative policy. And I think that it's going to continue to make a big difference in Arizona in the future. It'll be pretty fascinating to see how it differentiates Arizona from some of their neighbors, like New Mexico, for instance, and even California.
Future David, can I just say on that last bit with Stephen going through all the accomplishments in Arizona, I didn't realize this was a boxing match. He pulled out the big haymakers on me. I was kind of speechless for a second there.
Hey, man, you were telling us that we're going to fall behind in Arizona. I love my state. I got to defend us.
Well, I can say from experience, you both have pretty great states, and actually both of them are pretty fortunate to have pretty strong leadership in the state director role for AFP, being you two, and also all the individual members of your teams. I really appreciate the great work that you do. Really fighting for your states and trying to make them places that really embrace freedom and opportunity. So, anyone have any last thoughts as to make your case for daylight savings time or standard time?
I just don't want to see Arizona fall behind, David. That's all I'm saying. That's my last comment,
This is interesting. For a Federalist guy, he sure does have an opinion on another state and how we should conduct ourselves. What happened to choice, man? Freedom.
Listen, Virginia likes to say, we're the birthplace of democracy, but then we just told you all what to do to make democracy look good.
Might be a mole.
Maybe. Never know. Stay on your toes. You never know.
All right, cool. Well, hey, thank you both for coming on and having a little fun talking about daylight savings time. Folks, just so you know, there is a bill in Congress called the Protect Sunshine Act that, if passed, would end us having to change our clocks twice a year. So, some food for thought for everybody. You can do your own research. Well, if you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as well as follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Always remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend freedom and liberty. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.